The warm Arizona sunset painted the desert in shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the charred remains of Pleasant Valley Farm. Sarah Mitchell stood among the ashes of her life's work, her father's old Colt Peacemaker heavy in her hands as she watched dark smoke still rising from the smoldering ruins. At 42, she had already endured more loss than most. First her husband in the war, now this. But what the thugs who burned her farm didn't know, what no one in Pleasant Valley knew, was that Sarah Mitchell had been born Sarah Thorne, daughter of the most feared gunslinger the Western Territories had ever known. Pleasant Valley shimmered in the late summer heat, the Arizona Territory's unforgiving sun beating down on what remained of Sarah Mitchell's farmland. At first glance, the modest spread had looked like any other struggling homestead. A weathered farmhouse, a sturdy barn, and fields of corn stretching toward the distant mountains. But Sarah had made something special here, turning her dead husband's failing farm into the valley's most productive operation through sheer determination and an uncanny talent for working the land. Her success hadn't gone unnoticed. The Black River Mining Company had been buying up farms throughout the valley, their operations creeping closer to Pleasant Valley with each passing month. Their methods grew less subtle with each acquisition. First came the offers, then the threats, and finally, the accidents that seemed to plague any farmer who refused to sell. What none of them knew was that her success wasn't just about farming skill or determination. The Thorne family had once controlled every major water source from Tucson to the Mexican border, not through force alone, but through a deep understanding of the land's hidden resources. Sarah's father, James "Deadeye" Thorne, hadn't just been a legendary gunfighter. He'd been a master of territory control, using his knowledge of hidden springs and underground waterways to maintain power in the harshest desert environments. Mrs. Mitchell! Young Tommy Garcia, their teenage ranch hand, came running from the direction of the main road. Riders coming, 5 of them, led by that Davidson fellow from the mining company. Sarah straightened, unconsciously falling into the alert stance her father had drilled into her since childhood. Get Maria and help her secure the barn, then find Carlos and tell him to watch the back property line. As Tommy rushed to comply, Sarah felt something stirring in her blood, an awareness she'd spent 20 years trying to forget. William Davidson emerged from the heat haze, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as out of place in the dusty valley. 4 hard-looking men flanked him, their gun belts riding low in the style of hired killers. Sarah recognized their type immediately, though she pretended not to notice how they spread out to cover all angles of approach. "Mrs. Mitchell," Davidson called out, his tone perfectly cordial despite the threat implicit in his companion's positioning. Beautiful day for farming, though it must be difficult managing such a large operation on your own. "Mr. Davidson." Sarah kept her voice neutral, though her fingers itched for the peacemaker hidden in the house. "I wasn't expecting another visit so soon. My answer hasn't changed since last week." Davidson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The situation has changed, ma'am. We've discovered some irregularities in the original land grants. It seems the water rights you've been using might not be as secure as you thought." Sarah felt a familiar coldness settle over her, a clarity of thought she hadn't experienced since she'd left her father's house. Davidson was lying. She knew every detail of Pleasant Valley's water rights because she understood something he didn't. The visible streams and wells were just the surface. Below ground lay a network of ancient waterways that her father had mapped decades ago, knowledge he'd passed to her, along with other, deadlier skills. "My rights are perfectly secure, Mr. Davidson, though I'm sure the territorial office would be interested in examining your company's claims just as carefully." One of Davidson's men, a scarred individual with dead eyes, shifted his hand closer to his gun. Sarah noticed the movement without seeming to, her mind automatically cataloging angles and distances, just as she'd been taught. They weren't here for a peaceful negotiation. The timing was wrong, and their positioning spoke of violence to come. That's the problem with women trying to run businesses. Davidson sighed, dropping all pretense of courtesy. They don't understand how things really work. We're taking control of all water rights in this valley, one way or another. The smart folks have already sold. The stubborn ones. He gestured at his armed companions. Well, accidents happen. Sarah met his gaze steadily, showing nothing of the tactical calculations running through her mind. These men were used to intimidating ordinary farmers. They had no idea they were threatening someone who'd learned strategy and gunfighting. From the man who'd once outshot Doc Holliday himself, "You have until sundown tomorrow to reconsider our offer," Davidson announced, already turning his horse. "After that, we can't be responsible for any unfortunate events that might occur." As they rode away, Sarah remained outwardly calm while her mind raced with plans. She'd spent 20 years building a new life, trying to escape her father's violent legacy. But as she watched dust devils dance across her threatened land, she knew the time for hiding was over. "Tommy," she called to the young ranch hand who'd reappeared at her side, "ride into town. Tell Sheriff Morgan I'd like to discuss some concerns about the mining company." She paused, then added, "And stop by the telegraph office. Send a message to Jay Thorne in Tombstone. Just 3 words. Sarah needs you." The boy rushed to comply, not understanding the significance of the message he carried. Sarah watched him go, feeling the weight of her father's teachings settling back onto her shoulders. She'd chosen peace for 20 years, but she was still her father's daughter. Davidson and his men had no idea they weren't just threatening a widow's farm. They were awakening something that had been sleeping in the Arizona desert for 2 decades. Behind her weathered farmhouse, hidden beneath innocent-looking storage boxes, lay her father's old gun chest. Inside rested not just weapons, but detailed maps of every hidden spring and underground river in 3 territories. The Thorne family hadn't maintained their power through violence alone. They'd controlled the very lifeblood of the desert itself. Sarah Mitchell stood watching the sunset paint, Pleasant Valley in deepening shadows, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. The quiet farmer's widow was about to remind the territory why the name Thorne had once made even the most hardened gunfighters think twice about causing trouble in the Arizona desert. Sarah strode to her farmhouse porch, each step measured and deliberate. The evening brought a coolness that belied the heat building in her chest. Through the kitchen window, she could see Maria, her housekeeper of 10 years, pretending to work while stealing worried glances at the yard where Davidson's men had stood. The farmhouse held secrets that even Maria didn't know about. Behind the root cellar's back wall, a hidden room housed more than just her father's weapons. There were ledgers documenting water rights dating back 30 years, carefully preserved letters revealing corrupt deals between mining companies and territorial officials, and most importantly, her father's personal journal detailing every hidden water source in Pleasant Valley. Mrs. Mitchell, Carlos, her foreman, approached from the barn. A veteran of the range wars further north, he had an uncanny sense for trouble. "Those men, they're not just company thugs. I recognized one of them, Jake Reeves. He rode with the Clayton gang before they were wiped out. He's a killer." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Davidson's getting desperate. The mining company's running out of water for their operations up north. They need our underground springs." She caught herself too late, seeing Carlos's questioning look at her use of underground springs, knowledge that wasn't supposed to be common. But Carlos was too diplomatic to question her slip. Instead, he said, "Tommy's back from town. Sheriff Morgan wasn't in his office. His deputy said he's been meeting with mining company lawyers all week." Of course he had. Sarah remembered her father's teachings about corruption, how it spread like poison in a well, contaminating everything it touched. The mining company wouldn't have moved this aggressively without ensuring local law enforcement would look the other way. Sarah waited until Carlos had returned to his duties before entering the house. In her bedroom, she knelt beside the hope chest her mother had given her, the one possession she'd brought from her old life. Inside, beneath carefully folded linens, lay a false bottom concealing a single photograph. It showed a younger version of herself, standing beside a tall man with steel gray eyes and a gun belt worn with the ease of a second skin. James Dead-Eye Thorne hadn't just been the fastest gun in the territories. He'd been a master strategist who understood that true power came from controlling resources, not just winning gunfights. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the bedroom window, she spotted 3 riders approaching from the south, ranch hands from the Peterson place if she wasn't mistaken. Old Man Peterson had sold to the mining company last month after his barn mysteriously burned down. "Mrs. Mitchell," Tommy's voice carried urgency. "The Peterson boys are here. They say they got a message for you." Sarah tucked the photograph away and moved to the porch, noting how Peterson's youngest son, Billy, kept his hand near his gun. They'd been good neighbors once, before the mining company's money turned them. "Evening, Mrs. Mitchell," Jack Peterson, the eldest, called out. "Just passing along a friendly reminder about Mr. Davidson's offer. Be a shame if anything happened to this fine farm of yours." Sarah's response was cut short by the distant sound of galloping hooves. A single rider approaching fast from the direction of town. The Petersons turned to look, and Sarah saw their faces pale as the rider emerged from the evening haze. A tall figure on a dark horse, moving with the fluid grace that marked a true horseman. Even at a distance, Sarah recognized the distinctive pearl-handled revolvers at the stranger's hips. The Petersons didn't wait to make introductions, spurring their horses into a hasty retreat. They'd never met James Thorne, but every gunman in the territory knew the description of his signature weapons. The rider reined up at her gate, and Sarah felt 20 years of carefully constructed identity begin to crack. Her father's face had aged, but his eyes were the same, sharp as a hawk's and twice as dangerous. "Hello, little bird," James Thorne said softly, using her childhood nickname. "Seems like it's time for some family business." The sun slipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Pleasant Valley. Sarah Mitchell, Sarah Thorne, felt the weight of legacy settling onto her shoulders. By sending that telegram, she'd done more than just call for help. She'd awakened something that had been sleeping in the Arizona desert, something the mining company's thugs weren't prepared to face. Tomorrow would bring violence. There was no avoiding that now. But it wouldn't be the simple kind of violence Davidson's men understood. The Thornes hadn't maintained their power through force alone. They'd been masters of strategy, experts at using their enemies' assumptions against them. As night fell over Pleasant Valley, Sarah led her father into the house, already feeling tactical options unfolding in her mind. Davidson and his men thought they were dealing with a helpless widow. They were about to learn that some legends don't die. They just wait for the right moment to return. The dawn light crept across Pleasant Valley, revealing James Thorne studying his daughter's farmland through a brass spyglass. His weathered face showed no emotion as he tracked the movements of mining company men, positioning themselves along the valley's key water access points. "They're setting up just like you said," Sarah observed, joining her father on the farmhouse's hidden observation platform, a clever addition she'd built into the attic years ago. 3 groups, main force at the reservoir, smaller units at the creek crossings. James lowered the spyglass, his steel-gray eyes narrowing. "Davidson's no fool. He's got 30 men out there, using standard military tactics." He turned to his daughter. "But he doesn't know what we know about this land." Sarah unrolled a yellowed map on the platform's small table. The document showed more than just Pleasant Valley's visible water sources. It revealed an intricate network of underground springs and ancient waterways that her father had mapped decades ago. The mining company's geologists found traces of the main aquifer, she explained, pointing to recent excavation marks near the valley's northern edge. But they don't understand the full system. These underground channels connect everything. Control these 3 points. Her finger traced specific locations. "And you control all the water in Pleasant Valley." James nodded approvingly. "You've kept up with your studies." "Good. Now, about those men Davidson hired. Jake Reeves is their tactical leader. Run-ins with the law in Texas and New Mexico, Sarah confirmed. He's got a reputation for being methodical, thorough, and predictable. And predictable, James added. I crossed paths with him in '82. He always secures high ground first, places his best shots where they can cover the most territory, just like he's doing now on that ridge above your north pasture. Sarah felt old instincts awakening as she studied the enemy positions. Her father had trained her to think 3 moves ahead, to see patterns in enemy behavior that revealed their plans and their weaknesses. They expect resistance, she mused. But they're looking in the wrong places. All their preparations assume we'll fight to protect the visible water sources. A knock at the trapdoor interrupted their planning. Mrs. Mitchell. Carlos's voice carried urgency. Riders coming in from town. Looks like Sheriff Morgan himself this time. Sarah and James exchanged knowing looks. The mining company wouldn't waste time now that they'd shown their hand. The sheriff's arrival meant the next phase was beginning. Stay up here, Sarah told her father. Let's not show all our cards yet. She descended to find Sheriff Morgan already dismounting in her yard, 5 deputies spreading out behind him. The sheriff's usually genial face was set in grim lines. Sarah, he began, not bothering with pleasantries. Got some disturbing reports. Mining company claims you've been diverting water illegally, threatening their operations. He shifted uncomfortably. They've got papers from the territorial office. I need to inspect your water usage. Check your wells. Sarah noted how his deputies positioned themselves not to protect her property, but to contain any resistance. The mining company's influence ran deep. Of course, Sheriff, she replied calmly. I keep all my water rights documentation in order, though I'm curious about one thing. She met his eyes steadily. Did Mr. Davidson mention how many armed men he's moved onto my property boundaries this morning? Or why Jake Reeves, a known killer, is commanding them? Morgan's face reddened. Now, Sarah, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The mining company has legitimate security concerns. Indeed they do. The new voice carried absolute authority. James Thorne emerged from the farmhouse, his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming in the morning sun. Sheriff Morgan, been a long time. The change in the law officer's demeanor was immediate. His face went pale, and his hand froze halfway to his gun. Thorne? But they said you're dead. The papers said, papers say a lot of things, James replied mildly. Like those documents claiming my daughter's water rights are invalid. Interesting timing on those, wouldn't you say? The sheriff's deputies looked uncertain, several backing away slightly. James Thorne's reputation wasn't just about his skill with a gun. It was his tactical brilliance that had made him truly dangerous. This is still official business, Morgan managed, though his voice had lost its authority. The mining company has legal claims that can be properly reviewed by the territorial court, Sarah interrupted smoothly. I'm sure you'll want to examine all the documentation carefully, including, she added meaningfully, the evidence of certain financial transactions between mining company officials and local law enforcement. Morgan's face went from pale to ashen. James Thorne's reputation for gathering damaging information had been as feared as his gunfighting skills. I'll need to consult with the territorial office, the sheriff said stiffly. Make sure all the paperwork is in order. Sarah watched them retreat, noting how quickly the deputies abandoned their threatening positions. But this was just the opening move in a larger game. Davidson won't take this lying down, she observed, as the lawman vanished into the morning haze. He's invested too much. James was already scanning the ridgelines through his spyglass again. No, he won't. Reeves is shifting his men, tightening their positions. He lowered the glass, his expression thoughtful. But he's still thinking like a military man, preparing for a direct confrontation, while we're going to show him something completely different, Sarah finished, her mind already working through the strategy they'd developed during the night. The sun climbed higher over Pleasant Valley as father and daughter refined their plans. The mining company had numbers, weapons, and corrupt officials on their side. But the Thorns had something more valuable: generations of knowledge about the land itself and the strategic brilliance to use that knowledge in ways their enemies couldn't imagine. Sarah checked her father's old peacemaker, now riding at her hip. The familiar weight reminded her of long-ago lessons in strategy and survival. Davidson thought he was facing a stubborn widow and a legendary gunfighter. He was about to learn that the most dangerous opponents were the ones who could outthink you, not just outshoot you. High on the ridge, Jake Reeves watched the sheriff's departure through his own spyglass. The appearance of James Thorne complicated things, but Reeves had faced legends before. What he didn't realize was that he wasn't just facing two skilled opponents. He was about to encounter a kind of strategic thinking that had once made the Thorne name feared throughout the territories. The real battle for Pleasant Valley was about to begin, and it would be fought with wisdom as much as weapons. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah made her way to the hidden cave entrance behind the old oak grove. Her father's maps had revealed more than just water sources. They showed an intricate network of natural passages running beneath Pleasant Valley, channels that the Thorne family had used for decades to move unseen through their territory. "Carlos," she called softly, finding her foreman waiting in the shadows. "What news from town?" "Davidson's brought in more men," he reported. "But there's something else. Been asking questions about your father, about the old days. Some of his newer hands got spooked when they heard who they're really facing." Sarah smiled slightly. James Thorne's reputation was already working in their favor, making their enemies cautious. But reputation alone wouldn't win this fight. "Show me what you found in the northern passage," she instructed, lighting a lantern as they moved deeper into the cave system. The tunnels opened into a larger chamber where the sound of running water echoed off ancient stone walls. Carlos pointed to recent tool marks in the rock. "Mining company's tunneling operation came within 10 feet of this chamber," he explained. "They have no idea it exists, but one good blast could breach the wall." Sarah studied the marks carefully. "They're following the water table, trying to map the underground sources." She touched the damp stone. "If they break through here, they flood their own operation," Carlos finished. "The pressure from this underground river would destroy their excavation." This was the kind of knowledge that had made the Thorns powerful. Not just understanding the land's secrets, but knowing how to use them strategically. Sarah's mind was already formulating plans, seeing how this discovery could shift the entire conflict. Back at the farmhouse, James Thorne was engaged in psychological warfare of his own. Standing in plain view on the porch, his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming. He knew Jake Reeves would be watching through a spyglass from the ridge. "He'll be remembering Painted Rock," James explained to Tommy, who brought him coffee. "Back in '82, I turned his own men against him by making them think their positions were compromised. Fear does strange things to hired guns." The young ranch hand absorbed this lesson eagerly. Like many in Pleasant Valley, he'd grown up hearing whispered stories about the Thorne family's strategic brilliance. As evening approached, Sarah emerged from the cave system with more than just information. She carried her father's old saddlebags filled with documents that had been preserved in the dry caverns for decades. "Davidson's not the first to try controlling this valley through water rights," she told her father, spreading yellowed papers on the kitchen table. "The Carlson mining outfit tried the same thing in '75. Your maps show how they failed." James examined the documents with approval. History repeats itself. The same mistakes, the same assumptions about how water flows through this land. He looked up at his daughter. "You've done more than just preserve these records. You've added to them." Sarah nodded. 20 years of quiet observation had given her intimate knowledge of Pleasant Valley's hidden hydrology. She'd expanded on her father's work, mapping new channels and understanding how the underground water system had changed over time. The sun, sinking toward the western mountains, painted the valley in shades of amber and gold. But none of Davidson's men had made a move. They were waiting, growing increasingly uncertain as James Thorne's presence forced them to reconsider their assumptions about what they faced. "Tomorrow," Sarah said softly, studying the latest reports from their observers. "They'll have to move tomorrow. The mining operation up north is running critically low on water. Davidson can't afford to wait." Her father agreed. "Reeves will try something elaborate, multiple coordinated attacks, probably around dawn. He always loved complexity." A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. "Never understood that the simplest solutions are often the most effective." As night fell over Pleasant Valley, Sarah and James refined their strategy. The mining company thought they were facing a straightforward confrontation, a legendary gunfighter and his daughter defending their land. They had no idea they were dealing with something far more sophisticated, generations of accumulated knowledge about the land itself, combined with tactical brilliance that had once made the Thorne name legendary. Tomorrow would bring violence, but not the kind Davidson's men expected. The real battle wouldn't be fought with guns alone, but with understanding. Understanding of how water moved through hidden channels, how pressure built up in underground rivers, and how the land itself could become a weapon in the hands of those who truly knew its secrets. The quiet widow and the legendary gunfighter prepared for what was to come, knowing that their greatest advantage lay not in force of arms, but in the wisdom passed down through generations of strategic thinking. Davidson was about to learn why the Thorne name had once commanded respect throughout the territories, not just for skill with a gun, but for the ability to turn an enemy's strength into their greatest weakness. The pre-dawn darkness settled over Pleasant Valley like a heavy blanket, broken only by the faint flicker of lamplight from Sarah's farmhouse. Inside, final preparations were underway. Sarah and James Thorne moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and reviewing their carefully laid plans one last time. Through the farmhouse's hidden observation points, they tracked multiple groups of men moving into position around the property. Jake Reeves was coordinating his forces exactly as James had predicted, spreading them out to control key positions around the visible water sources. "Main force approaching from the north," Sarah reported, watching through her father's spyglass. 20 men, heavily armed. Reeves has another group working their way through the eastern creek bed. James studied the enemy movements with professional interest. He's dividing his forces, trying to control too much territory at once, making the same mistake he made at Painted Rock. But Sarah had spotted something more concerning. "They're carrying mining explosives. Looks like they're planning to destroy the reservoir dam if they can't control it." A ghost of a smile touched James's weathered face. Davidson's getting desperate, willing to destroy what he can't possess. He turned to Carlos, who had just entered with fresh intelligence. "Are our people in position?" The foreman nodded. "Tommy's got the charges set in the northern tunnel, just like you showed him. Maria's family is ready at the cave entrance. Everyone knows their part." Sarah felt the familiar clarity of mind that came before decisive action. The mining company thought they were orchestrating an overwhelming show of force. Instead, they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. The first light of dawn revealed Davidson himself arriving with a final group of men. He took position on a ridge overlooking the farm, clearly intending to direct operations from a safe distance. Through her spyglass, Sarah could see him consulting with what appeared to be a mining engineer, probably planning how to secure the water sources they thought were crucial. "Here they come," James said softly as mounted men began moving toward the farm from multiple directions. "Right on schedule." Sarah touched the grip of her father's old peacemaker, but she knew this battle wouldn't be decided by gunfire alone. The real fight would happen underground, where generations of Thorne family knowledge would prove more valuable than any number of armed men. "Mrs. Mitchell!" Davidson's voice carried across the morning air. "This is your final chance. We're taking control of these water rights one way or another. Come out now, and we can still discuss terms." Sarah stepped onto her porch, projecting calm confidence while carefully noting the positions of hidden gunmen. "My terms haven't changed, Mr. Davidson. This land and its water aren't for sale. This isn't about buying anymore. Davidson's facade of civility had vanished. We're taking control of all water sources in Pleasant Valley. Your cooperation is no longer required. Jake Reeves gave a signal, and his men began advancing on the reservoir dam. Others moved to secure the visible wells and creek access points. They were executing a textbook operation to seize control of the valley's water supply, but Sarah and James had spent the night preparing a very different kind of response. As Davidson's men reached their apparent objectives, Sarah raised her hand in a subtle signal. Deep underground, Tommy Garcia pulled a carefully prepared lever. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic for the mining company. The northern tunnel weakened exactly where their underground excavation had nearly breached the hidden river, collapsed spectacularly. A torrent of pressurized water burst through their mining operation, flooding their carefully engineered shafts and destroying equipment worth thousands of dollars. Impossible! Davidson's mining engineer was shouting, studying charts that suddenly proved worthless. The water table doesn't work like that. These readings can't be right. But Sarah and James were already implementing the next phase of their plan. Maria's family members, positioned at strategic points throughout the cave system, opened and closed hidden water channels that her father had mapped decades ago. The underground rivers responded to their expert manipulation, turning portions of the valley into treacherous ground for Davidson's mounted men. "Pull back," Reeves was shouting as horses foundered in suddenly muddy ground. "It's a trap." James Thorne stood on the porch beside his daughter, his pearl-handled revolvers prominent but still holstered. His mere presence sent waves of uncertainty through the hired gunmen, many of whom had grown up hearing stories about his legendary tactical genius. "You seem confused, Mr. Davidson?" he called out, his voice carrying easily across the chaos. "Perhaps you'd like to discuss the real history of Pleasant Valley's water rights, the history your mining company tried to bury." Sarah withdrew a packet of documents from her father's saddlebags, evidence they'd preserved in the dry cave system for decades. "Like these records showing how your company tried the same scheme in '75? Or these surveys proving you've been deliberately falsifying water table data?" Davidson's face had gone pale. The mining engineer was frantically checking calculations, trying to understand how his careful plans had gone so catastrophically wrong. More of his men were retreating from the increasingly unstable ground, but Jake Reeves wasn't finished. He directed a group of his most hardened men toward the farmhouse, determined to take control through direct action. "Burn it all," he ordered. "Take their command position." What he didn't know was that this too was anticipated. As his men approached the farm buildings, Carlos and his companions emerged from hidden positions in the old tunnel network, armed with both weapons and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The attackers suddenly found themselves caught between visible defenders and hidden forces that seemed to materialize from the earth itself. Sarah watched the confrontation unfold with the same tactical clarity her father had taught her years ago. Davidson's men were learning a harsh lesson about the difference between apparent control and true understanding of the land. "Your father was right," Carlos said quietly, rejoining them on the porch. They never thought to look deeper than the surface, never understood that the real power in this valley flows underground. More shots rang out as the last of Reeves's men tried to maintain their positions, but the battle's outcome was already decided. The mining company's carefully planned operation had been completely undermined, literally and figuratively, by the Thorns' superior understanding of Pleasant Valley's true nature. The morning sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the mining company's defeat. Their underground operations were flooded, their men were retreating in confusion, and their carefully fabricated water rights claims were about to be exposed to full scrutiny. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The real victory wouldn't be won through force of arms, but through the strategic use of knowledge that had been preserved and expanded through generations of careful observation and planning. Davidson's empire was about to learn why the Thorn name had once commanded respect throughout the territories, not just for skill with a gun, but for the deeper understanding that true power flows like water, not always visible on the surface, but unstoppable once its real nature is understood. "Stand down, Reeves," Davidson shouted, finally recognizing the futility of their position. "Fall back to the ridge." But Jake Reeves had staked too much of his reputation on this operation to retreat easily. He spurred his horse forward, drawing his gun with practiced speed. "The hell with water rights. Let's settle this the old way." James Thorne hadn't survived decades as a legend by being predictable. Instead of drawing his famous pearl-handled revolvers, he simply smiled. At that exact moment, the ground beneath Reeves's horse suddenly shifted, softened by carefully directed underground water flows. The animal stumbled, throwing its rider hard. "Look around you, Mr. Davidson." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Every piece of equipment you brought into this valley, every survey stake you planted, every camp you established, they're all positioned exactly where we wanted them. You haven't been running this operation. You've been following a script written generations ago." "Well," she gestured to the flooding mining tunnels, the muddied grounds that had trapped their horses, the suddenly revealed hidden springs that had turned solid ground treacherous. "The Thorne family didn't just map these water sources. We studied how they change, how they connect, how they can be used by those who understand their true nature." Davidson's mining engineer was frantically reviewing his charts. "These water patterns, they're impossible unless—" His eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Unless everything we thought we knew about this valley's hydrology was deliberately misleading. My grandfather started mapping these underground rivers before the Civil War," Sarah confirmed. "My father expanded that knowledge. I've spent 20 years adding to it. Your company isn't the first to think surface control equals true power." James Thorne hadn't moved from the porch, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the tension around him. "Davidson, your man Reeves there once asked me why I never seemed worried about running out of water, even in the worst droughts. He's about to learn the answer." More hidden springs were revealing themselves, turning the battlefield into a demonstration of the Thorne family's true mastery over Pleasant Valley. Davidson's men found themselves increasingly isolated on islands of solid ground, their tactical positions completely compromised. "It's over," Sarah called out. "But this doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Leave our valley, take your operations elsewhere, or stay and learn why no one has ever successfully challenged the Thorne family's understanding of this land." As Davidson and his remaining men retreated, Sarah knew that their victory wouldn't just protect her farm. It would remind the entire territory that some knowledge, passed down through generations and guarded carefully, was worth more than all the guns and money in the West. The quiet widow and the legendary gunfighter had demonstrated why their family name once commanded such respect. Not through violence alone, but through the wisdom to understand that true power flows like the hidden rivers beneath their feet, invisible to most, but undeniable to those who know its secrets. In the days that followed, word spread quickly throughout the territory. The Black River Mining Company had withdrawn its claims on Pleasant Valley's water rights, and William Davidson had resigned his position, his reputation in ruins. The territorial court, faced with the evidence Sarah and James had preserved in their hidden archives, launched investigations into years of corrupt land deals and falsified water surveys. Sheriff Morgan quietly retired, citing health concerns. Sarah Mitchell no longer hid her true identity. The name Thorne once again commanded respect in the territory, but for different reasons than in her father's day. Where James had built his reputation on gunfighting skill, backed by strategic brilliance, Sarah became known for her mastery of the land's hidden resources and her willingness to share that knowledge with those who would use it responsibly. "You've changed what our name means," James told her one evening as they sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the restored Pleasant Valley farm in shades of gold. "Made it stand for something better than I ever could." Sarah smiled at her father. "I just built on what you taught me. That true power comes from understanding, not just force." The farm had become a gathering place for ranchers and farmers throughout the territory, all eager to learn about sustainable water management in the harsh desert environment. Under Sarah's guidance, they formed a cooperative that ensured fair water access for all, making the valley bloom as never before. James stayed through the summer, helping to rebuild what Davidson's men had destroyed. But they both knew he wouldn't remain permanently. The old gunfighter had too much restlessness in his soul. When autumn came, he saddled his horse one morning before dawn. The Pinkerton detective Harrison left a message, Sarah told him, handing him a folded paper. Says there's some mining outfit in Colorado trying the same scheme. Thought you might be interested. James took the note with a raised eyebrow. Sending me off to fight someone else's battles, little bird? No, Sarah replied, adjusting his saddle strap. Just thinking you might enjoy teaching another lesson about how power really flows. She stepped back, studying her father's weathered face. Besides, I have enough former gunfighters around here. Carlos is talking about starting a training program for ranch hands, teaching them about water management, not gun work. James chuckled as he mounted his horse. The Thorne legacy evolves. He tipped his hat to her. You know where to find me if you need me. As she watched him ride away into the dawn light, Sarah felt a sense of completion. She had reconciled her father's legacy with the peaceful life she'd built, finding strength in both. Pleasant Valley would flourish under her stewardship, its hidden waters flowing secure beneath the surface, just as the knowledge of those waters would continue flowing through generations to come. Sarah Thorne Mitchell returned to her farmhouse, her father's old Colt Peacemaker still in its chest, but no longer needed. The true power of the Thorne name now rested in understanding how the land worked, how people connected, and how wisdom,